For billions around the world, there is no development more keenly anticipated than the availability of the first COVID vaccines. How much longer? How expensive? Who gets it first? And when exactly is it going to be distributed to people around the world? Now, there are vaccine candidates doing various stages of trials presently. One of those with the greatest promise is the Oxford trial virus vaccine. It will be marketed by AstraZeneca and it will be produced in hundreds of millions of doses here in India at one of the most remarkable companies that we have, the Serum Institute of India, the world's largest producer of vaccines. Joining us now, Adar Poonawalla, the CEO of the Serum Institute. Thank you very much, Mr. Poonawalla, for being with us. When does the Serum Institute intend to roll out the Covishield vaccine?
So a lot of people have been asking that, Vishnu, and it's now directly related to the UK trials that are on the verge of completion currently. And if the UK goes in for an emergency licensure, we heard some reports recently about some hospitals that are going to get the vaccine in the first or second week of November. Then it'll be down to our regulators and the government of India to finally decide whether we also go down the emergency licensure route. Having said that, we would have to look at the data that is available both in the UK and in India before we can do that. We also have some other good news that, the vaccine is working as per the UK reports from AstraZeneca and Oxford in the elderly and the vulnerable populations, which was a concern as well. And if we look back in April, May, I would have never dreamt that we would have come so fast to this stage so quickly that we'd be in a position to do this. And our trials are also going on very well in India. We've injected more than 1,000 people with the vaccine. So that's where we are.
And in terms of acceptance over here in India, what would the process be, assuming that there is an emergency permission which is granted in the United Kingdom?
Well, you'd have to check that with the government of India on their decision to go ahead and do that. But again, look, it's still a bit early for that. Maybe in a few weeks, we can look at the data, analyze it, and see whether it's worth giving it to a limited population, the elderly, the healthcare workers, and the most vulnerable, because it is definitely giving an immune response, both the antibody response and the T cell response, which is, for your long-term immunity. And we need vaccines that will give you long-term immunity. A lot of people today, get the disease and feel that they'll be protected forever. That's not the case, sadly. And, after 4 or 5 months, you can still get the disease again and have long-term side effects. So that's why it's better to take the vaccine. And also, we hope that these vaccines will give you that long-term protection that we all need.
We'll get to a lot of this detail that you're speaking about, but just to pin you down on that one point, you said in the next few weeks, there needs to be a decision on whether you would perhaps use this on a trial basis among, say, the elderly or among certain other groups. Is that what you're looking at? That in India, assuming there are permissions, right, that you would be able to start a limited process of vaccinating people?
No, so again, let me clarify. That's for the government of India and the health ministry to answer, because they would have to be confident and decide. I can't say that, look, use this vaccine under emergency licensure. And this conversation would have to happen, of course, after the UK, which has done extensive trials in thousands of patients, licenses the vaccine in the UK. It's only after that, in a few weeks, that we can have that conversation with the government of India and the health ministry and the experts here to see whether it makes sense to look at doing something similar in India as well.
Adar, is there any reason to be concerned about the pause this month in stage 3 trials?
No, not at all. In fact, we didn't really need to pause even the first time round, because the vaccine was never causing an issue. It was a non-vaccine related event which was investigated, and we paused it, rightly so. Like the drug controller of India requested us to. And then we continued as soon as we shared the data that the patient abroad, overseas, had a neurological issue which was nothing to do with the vaccine. So, the vaccine is very safe. Thousands of people have had it in India and abroad. So we're cracking on track. with no safety concerns.
And how effective, and this just goes back to the point that you were mentioning earlier, how effective do you believe the first generation of COVID vaccines will be, and for how long will they continue to be effective?
So that's the million-dollar question, because the T cell response is an indicator of how you will develop your long-term immunity and have immunity. You know, after your antibodies wane off in 3 or 4 months, it's your T cell CD4, CD8 response which will give you that immunity if you're under attack after a couple of months. Now, whilst that indication is strong and good with the Oxford candidate and some of the others we're working on, not all the other candidates in clinical trials have shown that. And having said that, it's still not a guarantee. So I must make that clear. It's only after a year or two when we actually see vaccinated patients or people, whatever, being protected when they are exposed to the virus, if they're exposed to the virus, that we will know that the vaccine has given you that long-term immunity. So we will have to wait for a year or two to really know that beyond reasonable doubt. But the indicators are all positive. The science is very positive to indicate that you will have that long-term immune response.
Would there be a requirement for, say, a booster dose after a few months, even initially?
Oh, absolutely. The Oxford vaccine is going to be a 2-dose vaccine. Most of all the other candidates are going to be 2-dose vaccines. In fact, if you look at all the other vaccines that have been given to children, you know, they're 3-dose vaccines. Pneumonia, measles, 2-dose. You've got pentavalent. Even the HPV vaccine given to adolescent girls is a 2 or 3-dose vaccine. So most vaccines need the second and third dose to give you that boost and long-term immunity going forward.
And do we know when that booster dose, the first one, would need to be administered?
At the moment, like it's being done in the trials, it's a 28-day or a month, you can call it, gap between the first and the second dose.
All right. Will Covishield impact different age groups differently?
Well, of course, all vaccines give a different immune response. You know, if you're young and fit and healthy and your immune system is robust, you will probably respond better, to a vaccine. I assume the same will hold true even for this vaccine. And having said that, you know, the concern was that will the elderly be protected? We've incorporated that, as you know, you must have heard that, you know, we added the older generation also to our trial here in India to prove just that. The UK has done that also and shared the data publicly to say that it does give an immune response with the elderly, which is good news. You know, we were always fearful of that whether it will protect the elderly as well. That was our concern. So, it will give a slightly different response, but it seems at the moment we're going to get a response both in the young and healthy and also the elderly.
Just to come back to the point on booster doses, when would the second booster dose likely need to be given?
Now, as I said, a month apart. So you take it today, let's say, one shot, and then you take one after a month. That's what's happening in the trial. That's what the UK is doing. That's what we're doing in India. And we recommend that even in the program going forward, you know, after licensure.
How much will a single dose of Covishield cost?
That's one thing I won't comment on because, we're talking to the highest levels of the government and that's sensitive. We're discussing all of that. And when they announce it, I think everyone will hear about it. But it's going to be very affordable. It's going to be a few hundred rupees. It's going to be way cheaper than even a test, RT-PCR test today or a rapid antigen test. So that's why, it's going to be affordable. And as we've been discussing, the government will take most of that load on financially. And, that conversation is going on very well as well. The government of India and all the different departments have been very helpful and proactive in that. So it's good news all around.
Where else would you export it?
Mainly to the African countries, a little bit to South America, and of course our neighbors, Bangladesh, Nepal, because at the moment, the tie-ups that we have between Novavax and the Oxford AstraZeneca product, we have the rights in about 68 countries with Oxford and 92 countries with Novavax. Mainly it's Africa, India, and some parts of Asia. It's when our own candidates come about in about a year and a half, we will go to Europe and the United States with our own candidates.
And how would they be priced outside India?
Oh, they'll be priced at a substantially higher price. I'm definitely going to be subsidizing the price for my country because, that's what I can do and offer that, especially because our population is so large. We'll need a huge budget, and we're doing our best to keep the prices the absolute lowest in India.
Will India have 80,000 crores, you tweeted about this, available in the next 1 year to buy and distribute the vaccine? It was an open question to the government. Have you got an answer?
Well, I think I won't comment on that also because the government officials and others have made their statements. What I can say is that I'm talking at the highest levels with all the departments in the health ministry and other ministries, and their response has been very positive. I won't go into 80,000, 50,000. I won't comment on any of that. But what they've assured is that there's more than enough and sufficient funds that India has, to take care of all the campaigns. And that's the only conversation that I always wanted to have in good faith. And they've answered that, and they've made all the provisions, which I'm very grateful for. Because don't forget, the cold chain, the storage, the logistics, all of that is going to cost a lot of money. It's not just the vaccine price. And don't forget one more thing. We're not only going to depend on Indian vaccine manufacturers, maybe we'll import some vaccines also. And those vaccines are priced at $10, $20 if you look at the Pfizer and Sanofi GSK vaccines, the Moderna vaccines. So you have to take that into consideration as well. So it's a very complicated situation at the moment, which is now being addressed. And India is fully prepared and ready, I can say, from the interactions I've had with the government. And I can't ask for anything more.
You mentioned cold chain and storage. Where does India stand presently in terms of potentially distributing millions of doses in a small period of time?
Well, traditionally, we have relied on the universal immunization program that's geared up to have, the vaccines go out to the mothers and children in these clinics all over the country. So we'll be largely relying on that. And what I've been told by the government officials that we're going to be augmenting and enhancing those facilities on those locations, to have more cold storage and better cold storage conditions going forward. And look, we'll have to think out of the box and find other solutions and distribution channels as well, using hospitals and other avenues to be able to vaccinate so many people in such a short amount of time.
How critical is maintaining the right conditions and the right temperatures to the efficacy of the drug that you will be producing?
Well, it's very critical. In fact, that's where the challenge will come in for -20 or -80 degree vaccines. In fact, vaccines like Moderna and others, which have to be stored in -80, will probably be a non-starter in a country like India or maybe even parts in Africa because, you just don't have that infrastructure to do it, and it's just not practical. So I think as long as we can have +2 to 8 cold rooms and infrastructure ready, and maybe even -20, which we do have in India, we should be okay. But I think going to -80 and vaccines which have to be stored in -80, I don't think that's going to work in India and Africa and the developing world countries with the extreme temperatures and lack of infrastructure. And yes, to answer your question, it's extremely important because, that's the difference between keeping a vaccine outside, for a couple of weeks in a hot climate like India or Africa could completely destroy the efficacy. So the cold chain is absolutely essential.
And at what temperature does this drug need to be stored?
The Oxford AstraZeneca,
yes.
That's +2 to 8. So that's no problem. So is the Novavax.
All
I
right.
was referring to the other vaccine candidates overseas that might need to have, a better cold storage condition.
And just in terms of, our viewers would want to know, how will the vaccine be distributed once it's ready? Once you have it ready, you've got it stored, what happens then?
Well, again, we're going to leave that to the decision making at the center. They're going to decide the most vulnerable areas and people that it should be given to in terms of the healthcare workers and the elderly. How they distribute it in the states also will be decided by them. We're going to deal directly with MOH because I didn't want that responsibility in distributing and doing it, ad hoc to different states because I might miss something. I may, we don't know who is the most vulnerable, and the health ministry officials know that and have that data, and we will leave it to them to do that in a fair and ethical manner, especially initially when there's going to be a shortage of the product, and we keep gearing up along with the other Indian vaccine manufacturers. So it's better that they're the central nodal point and they've taken the lead in this, and we respect their decision and we're complying with that. I think later on we may, once there's enough supply to go around, enter into the private market and sales, but initially we'll probably give most of our stock to the government of India.
And why did you back the Oxford trial vaccine with a $200 million investment? It's a huge risk, some would say. I know why you wanted to do it, obviously to save lives, period. That's the bottom line. But as a business leader, as a businessman yourself, $200 million in an investment several months back on a drug which is still not cleared trials, the final stages of trials.
No, absolutely. So if you go back in March, April, people thought I was crazy. My critics said that, you don't know what you're doing. How can you go ahead with this and that and all of that? But the way I looked at it is that if we don't commit to 2 or 3 principles in science and to these trials, we won't have a hope in hell of having large volumes of vaccines coming out by the end of this year or early next year, because the facilities have to be designed, the trials have to be done accordingly. And so the investment we made and then further raised capital from Bill Gates and his foundation, which was very helpful, I must say, to the tune of another $300 million, that we used all this capital for the capex and opex for multiple candidates, Novavax, AstraZeneca, and so many others. So I was betting on all these vaccines. Of course, Oxford and Novavax were the front runners, so that's why those projects are more visible. But this investment, I must clarify, was not just for one candidate, it was for 3 or 4 of these different candidates. So that's the call we took, and we had to commit, because if we didn't start then and waited for this moment to arrive where we're seeing all this lovely data coming out, we would have lost 6 months, and 6 months would be, I don't know how many countless lives would have been lost had I not made that decision come March, April.
When we spoke the last time around, you spoke a little bit about how you make decisions. And you don't spend weeks on end in board meetings and PowerPoint presentations back and forth. I'm sure there would be PowerPoint presentations, but the decision making is fast. How long did it take?
About 2 to 3 hours, I would say, because, this was a discussion which was both technical in terms of the scientific strength that these candidates had. So I would say, it was pretty quick in the sense that it wasn't the financial part that was troubling us. It was backing the right candidate that we had to be very sure about. Otherwise, you'd lose time. Financially, we were able to make this decision because very quickly because, we're privately listed. We're not accountable to shareholders, and we can take these risks. This was the time to do it. So once we were convinced on the science, it was very easy to move forward. And, of course, my father was concerned that how will we raise $700-800 million so quickly? And that's when I was talking to private equity and other funds also to help us in addition to our own capital that we put in. And then Bill Gates and his foundation was very nice enough to advance us some of the capital for the vaccines that we're going to eventually supply to Gavi and the African countries, including India. So that's how we then bridged the gap between the capital that we needed to spend on, including what we were investing.
Have you been nervous over the last few months?
Well, I think nervous would have been an understatement. The pressure to perform and to be right and successful in this for the sake of the country and humanity was tremendous. There were lots of ups and downs, the uncertainty, even of the deal making that I was trying to get signed up and then move forward on. So it was particularly a very stressful period, including getting permissions and other licenses in time, for which the government of India was very helpful in. And, all that together compressed in a very short period of time was very stressful. And fortunately, we came out of that quite well. And now things are sort of on autopilot, and I'm just waiting for the results to come about. And, now we'll see how we can make the vaccine available as soon as possible.
In the last few months, was there ever an occasion when you felt it's not going to happen for some of the reasons you mentioned? permissions, the trials themselves, did you at any stage feel that I made a bad decision?
Well, it was always on a week-to-week basis. I didn't know if I was going to have the funding to do something. I didn't know if I was going to have the rights to sell and manufacture some of these products. I didn't know which equipment to buy, what technology to back. So every week was like a new challenge coming about that we'd never faced before. It was unprecedented. So, as I said, we came out of that, and I don't know, it's probably too soon to say that were there any mistakes that we've made. I think we've done the best that we could, and I don't have any regrets on what we've done. Perhaps in hindsight, one could have had, a lot of capacity built ahead of time that we've been doing. That's why we're fortunate enough to be able to rejig some of the plants and do it. But I don't think there were any mistakes that we've made so far, and it's probably too soon to dwell on that. But generally speaking, I don't have regrets. I just learn from my possible mistakes, if at all any, and then try to improve upon that in the future. So at the moment, I think we've done the best we could, given the information that we had, and we've backed these winners. I mean, if you looked at March, April, when there were 100 candidates in trials, who would have thought that the Oxford, AstraZeneca, and Novavax would have done so well? I mean, we had a gut feeling, we believed in the science, but still, a lot of things could have gone wrong. Some things did go a little wrong in the sense that we had a few hiccups along the way, but we moved past that, and I'm sure there'll be hiccups still yet to come, but we'll get there eventually, and hopefully as soon as we possibly can.
So Adar, how long will it take for you to ramp up production to 200 million doses per month? Because that's been an initial target, hasn't it?
No, well, it was always about 100 million doses per month. And I think by the third or fourth quarter of next year, we'll get there. At the moment, we're at a capacity of around 40 to 50 million doses per month. We've started production and stockpiling already. And, as we ramp that up, and I'm dedicating a third facility also to do it. So we'll get to about 100 million doses per month, which I think will be more than enough, given that there are other candidates and other manufacturers also who are going to start supplying from the second and third quarter of next year. So that's when you're really going to see a lot of supply coming into both in India and the world, second, third quarter of 2021.
Why is the deal with Codagenics to develop another vaccine candidate important for you?
Well, it's very important because it's going to be a nasal vaccine. And as we all know, nasal vaccines are going to be very easy to administer. You don't need all those trained medical staff to do it. It's going to be cost effective. And most importantly, it will be, because it's a live attenuated vaccine, probably one of the most powerful vaccines, giving you that long-term immunity that we talked about earlier, because it's the whole virus. It's not these subunit protein vaccines where you just have part of the coronavirus, stuck onto something else. This is going to be the full virus, and that's why we hope that that'll give you that long-term immunity. So that's why we bet on that as well. In addition to all these candidates, of course, that's going into a phase 1 in the UK by the end of this year. And then, we'll do another phase 3 perhaps in India later on. So that's why that's going to come last, probably Q4 of 2021.
And ultimately, going forward, would patients or just normal people need to vaccinate themselves using different drugs for the best solution?
Very good question. I think at the moment, what the health experts have recommended is that take whatever the safe and efficacious vaccines are available at the moment, because getting the disease is far worse than, getting that 50, 60, 70% protection, and then wait to take another shot and a booster. And we're going to have to do some trials, I must clarify, to show that it's okay for you to take another vaccine maybe a year later. And there is already talk of some studies where they're going to do a trial with multiple different vaccines being taken over a period of time by the same patient, and there should be no safety complications on that. So maybe yes, to answer your question, in a year you could try out and take a second vaccine as a booster shot, depending on whatever is the best thing at that time. That's what I would recommend, and certainly not wait for those vaccines to come about, because that could be 6 months or a year. And you don't want to put yourself in harm's way during that period, and you should take whatever is safely licensed by, India and the UK in the interim period.
And a lot of people want to know about the Serum Institute. What is the Serum Institute doing to guarantee the safety and quality of your vaccines produced? It's life and death what you produce. How do you ensure that that standard is maintained?
Well, as you know, that most of our vaccines are administered to newborn babies. So you can imagine the level of safety in our manufacturing and our processes and our quality assurance that goes in. Like the BCG vaccine is given on day one of a baby being born. So you can imagine how safe and perfectly okay these vaccines are. Having said that, of course, new vaccines with new technologies have to go through trials. The advantage with the Oxford AstraZeneca platform is that it's a time-tested platform. The chimp adenovirus has been used for the Ebola vaccine and other things in the past for many, many years. That's why I'm so confident to start with, to comment on that vaccine safety, to be 100%.
And a final couple of questions. Can you tell us about the team that you have at the Serum Institute that's getting ready to ramp up production of the vaccine? I mean, you take the decisions, but then there's an entire team. And what exactly are they doing with regard to Covishield? Could you describe what it is that they're doing?
Well, a mixture of things. At the moment, now we've already gone into, as I mentioned, full-scale production. Initially, the team was designing and rejigging the facilities so that we could handle this technology, and we sacrificed some of the products we were going to launch in Europe and the United States for this by 2 or 3 years, till my new facility comes up, which is a dedicated facility for COVID. So we were rejigging all of that, ordering a lot of equipment, finding ways to get it quickly installed and validated, and then going into production. And these are guys who have been doing this for, we've got people in our team who've been working for 30 years in Serum Institute. So highly experienced, highly dedicated, loyal staff, without which, we wouldn't have been able to do any of this. And I'm so grateful to them because, my decisions today wouldn't have been implementable if it wasn't for their efforts and their expertise to be able to execute these huge projects, which I'll show you sometime over here when you come and visit Serum to get an idea of the scale at which we're operating at, which is, as you know, the largest in the world.
So that brings me to my final question. And it's related to my first question, as you may imagine, because people want to know about time. And you've mentioned that it's not in my hands, it's what the government has to say, the trials need to finish, it needs to be, there needs to be a peer review. So let's talk about that peer review of data in the United Kingdom. How long would that take?
So let's split that question in two. If we don't go for an emergency licensure, our trial should be over by December, and then we could maybe launch in India in January, subject to the UK trial also being completed, which it's on the verge of being completed. The second part of that question, the answer is that if the UK in the next 2 weeks were to unblind their study and share the data and be confident that it's safe, then we can, after 2-3 weeks, apply to the Indian regulator to look at a possible emergency licensure if that's what the government of India wants. That review could take another 2 to 3 weeks, I imagine, and then you can have a vaccine by December. But all these things would have to happen. And I don't want to venture a guess whether that would happen or not happen, because it's not my place to do so. That's for the health ministry officials and the experts to decide.
Adar Poonawalla, very inspiring. This is the ultimate example of Made in India, Atma Nirbhar Bharat, and what you're doing for this country, and not just India, but so many countries around the world. One just hopes, for the sake of billions around the world, this works out. Thank you very much for speaking to us.
I hope so too. Thank you very much.
Thank you.